Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Mirowitz Center program today. We welcome Tola Porter, who is a PhD candidate in art history and archaeology at Washington University in St. Louis. She holds a master's in art history from the Institute of Fine Arts, New York University, and an MA in Arts Administration from Columbia University. Her research focuses on modern public sculpture from the mid to late 20th century. She defended her dissertation entitled Modernism as Public Art, Awakening Social Agency in Abstract Public Sculpture, 1950 to 1980, in September of 2021. Tola is a board member and archivist historian for Public Art Dialogue and is the co-chair for Public Art Dialogue's 2022 CAA session entitled Notions of Value in Public Art. Please welcome Tola Porter. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm so delighted to be here. Since I am going to be presenting with PowerPoint, I'm going to go ahead and start my screen share and get that up and running. So just take a moment. Let's see. Does everyone see the screen now?
No, we're not seeing it, Tola.
What happened? Okay, let me get back to Zoom. Screen share. Okay, excellent. I think that should work.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, super. Excellent. That's me.
Here we are.
Here we are. Super. So my name is Tola Porter. You've heard a little introduction today. What I'd like to do is take us through some highlights of the collection at the Mildred Lane Kemper Art Museum. Now, I'm about to finish my many years of PhD work at Washington University. And so you can imagine just how much time I've spent in this museum. And it's been a real honor to be a member of their student educator program across the years. So the plan is to look at artworks for about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll have about a 10-minute Q&A. And I'm going to present 10 different art historical moments, not all of them periods, not all of them super defined, but moments that are exemplified by artworks in the Kemper. And we'll do a little discussion really of the art historical background, and then we'll look at the artworks together. If the spirit moves us, maybe I'll ask you to type a little bit into the chat function. But perhaps it'll be more simple just to carry through with our talk. So first, let me give you a little bit of the history of the Kemper Art Museum. This museum was founded in 1881. It is actually the oldest museum west of the Mississippi, and it's one of the oldest teaching museums in the country. It was established as the St. Louis School and Museum of Fine Arts at Washington University and was originally located downtown. In 1906, due to insufficient space, the collection was moved to the Palace of Fine Arts in Forest Park, which many of you know is the St. Louis Art Museum. The entire collection remained there on loan for decades and decades. In 1941, the German exile Horst Janssen joined the Washington University art history faculty, and he was a real game changer, very dynamic person. During his tenure, he initiated an expansive program to revitalize the museum. He deaccessioned more than 600 objects, which was about 1/3 of the collection. And I've read up on this. Apparently, he had to get the board involved because we're talking about objects that were gifted by, loyal alums of the museum, which of course you have to be careful about trying to sell these objects. But we're talking, several beer steins from Germany and this kind of, silver spoons, this kind of objet. And Jansen was interested in buying contemporary art, which we now call modern art. And so he needed to free up some funds. So he got the board on his side and ended up making a massive sale. And then he bought 38 works of modern art in Cubism, Expressionism, and Surrealism. And his plan, as he said, was, quote, to build the finest collection of contemporary art assembled on any American campus. So he also wrote the book on art history. And here is literally the Jansen book of art history that we use to teach at WashU still today. There are updated versions every year, but this gigantic heavyweight book is his contribution to art history. So in 1960, a new building was built on the campus. That was Steinberg Hall, if any of you were familiar. And the collection came home at that point. Then in 2006, this building here was built. This is actually even a more updated new wing that just opened in 2019. And so the current building in 2006 was named for Mildred Kemper, who was a philanthropist and an old banking family in the Midwest, and she was devoted to art. And so her name, her gift of $5 million helped build the museum. So walking through 10 different movements of art history, let's begin with American art in the mid-19th century. During the mid-19th century, the United States expanded significantly through the acquisition of new territories. After the Civil War, the US would emerge as an economic force on the world stage. Manifest destiny was a term used to justify and celebrate the United States westward expansion at mid-century, asserting the divine right of European Americans to claim new territories in a form of settler colonialism. American art at this time bolstered such ideas, but also occasionally questioned them. In the bolstering category, we have the George Caleb Bingham, Daniel Boone escorting settlers through the Cumberland Gap. And we can see, if we look at this, notice perhaps the way the light is both lighting the path from which they've come and highlighting their faces in the direction that they're going. A very unnatural light, as you can imagine, because not everything was going to be dark all around with a big spotlight, but this highlights the destiny effect on these people, that they are lit from, a divine lamp showing their way forward to the West. But there's some works that are exposing the costs of manifest destiny in terms of, there are actually very few, in terms of actually displaced American Indians that were moved off of their land. But Thomas Cole, here on the right, an Englishman who, or an American who also painted in England, painted this aqueduct near Rome. Now, some of you might say, what does this have to do with America? It's obviously a Roman aqueduct. It is some, exploration of a ruins of a wonderful and intense, populated empire. What does that have to do with America? Well, of course, America often related itself to Republican Rome and adjacently to the Empire of Rome itself. And so Cole paints this as a sort of symbolic warning that the US could become, like the Roman Empire, a victim of its own pride. Realism. Here we see a painting by Thomas Akins, a leading prominent proponent of realism in 19th century American painting. Realism is a broad term for the style and subject matter of late 19th century art that reflected burgeoning scientific advances, a growing economic disparity between the ruling and the working classes, and a detailed and naturalistic depiction style. Realism coincided with a rebellion against academic and aristocratic subject matter in the arts, this rebellion was an outgrowth of protests against the industrialization and the rise of factory production. This gave rise to revolutions, uprisings, and demands for workers' rights. Here's another example of a realist subject matter. We have Gustave Courbet's The Stonebreakers from 1849. This is not in our collection, but I wanted to point to a very well-known realist painting, not only because of the depiction, the very clear naturalistic depiction of a boy and a man breaking rocks as their daily work in their scuffed and repaired clothing with their one pot of food for the day and the backbreaking work ahead of them, but also for the actual subject matter of portraying workers. And this was an absolutely unusual thing to be doing at this time. And it was a statement by Courbet about social status and norms and problems for the working class. So back to our Thomas Akins. He often painted portraits of friends who are accomplished in the fields of science, medicine, and academia. And this painting is no different. William Dennis Marks is a St. Louis native, a prominent professor of dynamical engineering at the University of Pennsylvania. He's depicted here seated at his desk, seemingly lost in thought, surrounded by books and the tools of his profession. While the background is loosely painted, the foreground is in much sharper focus, especially this machine on his desk. This is a chronograph that Marx invented, and it allowed for experiments in motion photography. So we can see that the light, again, we notice the light and the composition. The light hits both the hands of the scientist inventor and the forehead, which also connects directly to the glint on his machine. And so there's a connection between the mind of the inventor and the product he was able to produce. This is one of Akins' most ambitious portraits, and it demonstrates how the artist's interest in technology and science was connected to his advancement of realism in painting. So moving from realism to Impressionism. Impressionism is a drifting away from that exact specific depiction of the real world. And the essential notion of realism, which in French is il faut être de son temps, one must be of one's own time. This also gave rise to Impressionism. From the 1860s until the early 20th century, Impressionist artists investigated the physical world in new ways, especially properties of color and light, to convey with heightened immediacy with both the subject and experience of modernity. So not only are they conveying subject matter of a landscape or a seascape here, but it is the mood of the artwork that they're interested in getting across. So Storm on the Delaware by George Innis is an example of his late style. It's often he's associated with American Impressionism, and this painting emphasized mood and effect over narrative or topographical documentation. He used a tonal palette, very limited. We can see almost all tones of browns and greens and a little bit of light here and there and a rainbow, but a very muddy brown Delaware, to depict a peaceful river scene after a storm. The sky is filled with the tumble of storm clouds that merge into the hills of the background. effectively creating a scene that obscures the landscape beyond. Now, interestingly, down here we can see that Innis signed this work of art, but he also apparently sanded down the surface. And so this is a technique that he possibly is using to create even more of that ethereal post-storm kind of impression on the surface, and to kind of blur out any hard lines and to give more of an emotional effect with his painting. So another leading figure of the American Impressionist movement is Child Hassam. He developed a distinct painting style characterized by quick brushwork, solid volumes, and close attention to the changing effects of atmosphere and light. And to many of our eyes, this looks more like what we're familiar with Monet and other Impressionists who are painting on plein air. This painting, Diamond Cove, Isle of Shoals, depicts a granite outcropping from part of the Isle of Shoals off the Atlantic coast near the border of Maine and New Hampshire. A range of translucent brown and blue tones suggests the complex visual interplay between the transparent water and the jagged rocks, with short, thick marks evoking the rippling motion of the water. In the upper left, a rocky formation juts out above the water, while submerged rocks visible in the shallow, clear water of low tide create an effect of visual unity across the picture plane. Hassam's tight focus on a select element from nature illustrates his interest in using a modern style of painting to capture the sensations of a specific moment and place. And I particularly appreciate the translucentness he was able to achieve in depicting this water. You know, this is of course not translucent at all. These are marks on a canvas. And to be able to create that sense of translucent depth is extremely impressive to me. Moving from Impressionism to Expressionism. Expressionism. In the 1880s and 1890s, the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche wrote about an intellectual and cultural crisis facing European society. According to Nietzsche, the development of science and modernization had invalidated religion, leaving a spiritual void and a widespread conformity to mass culture and outdated morals. The term Expressionism links multiple groups of German and international artists working in painting, printmaking, and sculpture in Germany in the first decades of the 20th century. These radical artists use bold, sometimes harsh colors, distorted and exaggerated forms, and loose applications of paint to depict not things as they appear to the eye, but things filtered through the artist's emotions and subjectivity. One of the most influential German modernists is Max Beckmann. He painted Les Artistes mit Gemüse, which means artists with vegetable, while living in exile in occupied Holland after leaving Nazi Germany in 1937. In this painting, Beckmann depicts himself in the lower right corner here, accompanied by 3 fellow exiles. Gathered around a small table, everyone holds a mysterious attribute, including a fish, a vegetable, maybe a carrot, perhaps a mask, or maybe that's what Beckmann holds. And each object is related to the person's identity. Despite the hostilities and turmoil in the external world, possibly referenced by the fire outside of this window, the artists sit like shaman figures, and they engage in a spiritual and ritualistic ceremony. Beckmann in particular, during his time in exile, stressed the separation of art from politics, seeing art as an autonomous realm in which the artist's role was to shape spiritual life. Beckmann's relationship with Nazi Germany was complicated. Despite the fact that the National Socialists officially regarded his art as degenerate, and although Beckmann left Germany on his own accord, he continued to cultivate friendships with influential supporters of National Socialism, both before his departure and during his time in Amsterdam. Nevertheless, we sense exile and a sense of war permeates the painting and is maybe expressed very well on the expressions of the faces, their bags under their eyes, their furrowed brows, and just a general sense of concern. So from the power of Expressionism to the innovation of Cubism, around the turn of the 20th century, scientific advances cast doubt on the absoluteness of accepted truths. Mathematician Henri Poincaré proposed that Euclidean geometry was only one of many systems for understanding the physical world. And in 1905, Albert Einstein's theory of special relativity stated that space, rather than being a fixed property, varied according to speed and gravitational force. In the same period, advancements in automobiles, flight, cinema, all led to the perception of a fragmented world in constant motion. A group of artists working in Paris around 1908, including Georges Braque, Pablo Picasso, applied such developments in ways that profoundly shifted artistic discourse. They rejected the notion of a single point perspective, which we had inherited from the Renaissance, where space just goes directly back as it appears to us in our everyday lives. This has been traditionally used to present an illusion of a visible world on a flat canvas. We've all seen this work and become very familiar with this convention. Instead, Cubists rendered a subject from multiple viewpoints, simultaneously converting volumes into planes and cubes, a characteristic that inspired the name Cubism. Cubist subjects derived from modern life, most notably Parisian cafe culture, with its familiar drinking glasses, musical instruments, and gaming tables. Cubists also pioneered innovative methods in collage and sculpture by incorporating such elements as sheet metal, wallpaper, and newspaper clippings, literally eroding boundaries between art and the everyday world. The Spanish artist Juan Gris was a leading Cubist painter practicing in France with Picasso and Braque. Like the work of his fellow artists who pioneered the Cubist approach, he also painted fragmented objects from multiple perspectives. Gris focused on the relationship between dimensional forms and a flat canvas. So in this painting, we see familiar Cubist subject matter. We have a glass here, a napkin, playing cards, a checkerboard. They're all rendered though as flat planes that closely overlap. During the mid-1910s, when he executed this work, Gris began his paintings with arbitrarily placed color fields, into which he introduced references to identifiable objects. So, perhaps he started with this yellow and then put a checkerboard over it and started with this, randomly placed red, and then decided that that was part of the table or something depicting underneath the glass. So, for example, they're transparent, intersecting with the grounds on which they appear. And we can turn to a later work by Braque, 1937, and see that still he's depicting these, the subject matter of the Cubists, and frankly, the subject matter of a lot of art history, a still life. So these are objects that we can recognize. Does anybody want to type into the chat function about what they see on this table? What are the objects that you see? Oysters, excellent. Lemon, baguette, napkins, maybe a flask, good point, napkin, bread plate, and the lemon. I would, exactly. I mean, these things are pretty legible, which is sort of unusual for Cubism and points to the lateness of this painting. But the flask itself is very cubistically rendered. We see the top opening, which you would never see if you were looking straight on. And we sort of see side angles and different distortions of the bottle in different ways, so that we can try to, grasp some of the cubistic history of Braque. I think we can also notice the way that the space is depicted. This exaggeration of a sort of, restaurant wasteboard or chair rail type thing, many different kinds of layers of wallpaper or stripes that are on the wall that he is rendering. This table that's supposed to be three-dimensional, is it really? It's more flat than anything else. So you're looking almost at a plane of green with a line that's supposed to indicate that the table is turning down toward the floor, but it doesn't really work. So I think Braque is doing an interesting thing here by rendering objects that are very familiar in a nice combination of extremely cubistic, hard to render, hard to understand with the eye, and also very familiar. Great job, chat function people. Okay, so from Cubism, we move, and let's just pause here for a second. That's 5 movements that we've already been through, and we will be covering the 5 more. We'll see 2 of them on this slide. Moving on to Surrealism, we can notice so far that the movements we've looked at are really inspired by historical moments, right? So there is, and that's the same with Surrealism. In the wake of World War I, the idea of really grasping an established notion of rationality and human enlightenment went by the wayside with the level of cruelty, death, and destruction on a scale never seen before. Humans really needed to have a different way of coming to grips with reality. And many of them rejected reality altogether for surreality, okay? Surreality is a literary and artistic movement developed in Paris in the aftermath of World War I. In 1924, the founder of the movement, the French writer André Breton, envisioned surrealism as the expression of the unconscious. Of course, Breton's ideas were based on the theories of the Austrian psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud, who attributed psychosis to the repression of instinctual urges. Freud theorized that repressed desires and traumatic memories could be uncovered through free association and dream analysis, techniques later adopted by the Surrealists. So a leading British sculptor of the 20th century is Henry Moore, and he dedicated his career to experimentation of the human form in varying degrees of abstraction. And this is one of his more surreal sculptures. It's a reclining figure, and Moore often sculpted the body lying lengthwise as a reclining figure. This position allowed for the body to resemble landscapes and geological formations if he abstracted the body enough. So associating the corporeal body with a permanent and timeless piece of the landscape was a way to maybe rise above or transcend the fact of death for humanity. In this work, we have a female figure. She's composed of three substantial masses. We have a torso, a stomach, and the legs. These are bridged by thin struts that extend horizontally along the form. And these connectors allow him to open up the form and allow for spaces all through the form, here, 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 and here. And this is one of the very few artworks he made out of concrete. Henry Moore was a direct carver, and later he used bronze. But he actually created this material himself, including different pigments to make the concrete look a little bit like stone. So he would have had to form the figure. And in order to get these skinny, skinny lines, he included I'm looking for the word, iron, little thin pieces of like steel girder in here. To keep these very skinny pieces, because it's very, very difficult to carve something that thinly. So then he created this object and then would have carved directly onto the concrete to create this final form. This is one of the objects that Horst Jansen bought after his sale of all the other artworks. Moving on to post-war abstraction. Move this aside. We have Hans Hofmann, and I'm going to show you two more abstract expressionist paintings by Jackson Pollock and Villam de Kooning, sort of the big name people. But it's important for us to start with Hans Hofmann because he really was the teacher of so many of the abstract expressionists, and he does not get enough art historical attention. And I think it's certainly time for a complete revival of Hofmann's work. He was a German trained painter with roots in post-impressionism and cubism, and he came to the States in 1932 at the invitation of one of his students, who is now a professor at an art school. He ended up staying in New York City and was out on Long Island, where many of the abstract expressionists were living at the time. Hofmann is acknowledged as an influential teacher who brought a firsthand knowledge of 20th century modernist vocabularies to artists in this country, especially those of the abstract expressionist generation. His painting is characterized by its rigorous concern with pictorial structure and unity, spatial illusionism, and use of bold color for expressive means. So maybe we see a little bit of the legacy of the German expressionists in the way he's painting, in the boldness of his painting. But I think we also see the influence of Cubists and the Fauvist color of Matisse. Fauvism we didn't go over here, but that was a post-impressionist movement that used high key color for expression. Hofmann called his technique push-pull, and he wanted the forms in his paintings to activate a three-dimensional tension on a two-dimensional surface. So, you can kind of get a sense of this tension. There's perhaps a background of blue, there's a foreground of objects here. It's not fully abstract. This is perhaps a bottle, this is maybe a plate of some kind, these details. Is this flowers in a vase? We don't know, but there's a real dynamic movement with these compositional V shapes and the angularity that he painted on this work. And I think this is a really exceptional painting to have in our collection, because it really is the beginning of something very, very big. And here is the big, here's what happened. So the Kemper is proud to have Jackson Pollock and a Villam de Kooning. This Pollock is after his drip period. You all may be familiar with the all over paintings where Pollock took a can of paint and just dripped all over. Once he had really used that method to its fullest, he came back to putting figures in his works. And so we might see here this, you see both the expressive handling of his drip painting. So this is a black line that's being dripped down. You can sense that fluidity of movement. With this reclining figure in the foreground. So we have another reclining figure similar to Henry Moore. There's unidentifiable imagery surrounding this figure, amorphous blue background, but it contains, and you can't tell here, a thick impasto of rich colors. And impasto just means it's thick paint that you can see three-dimensionally if you were standing in front of it. Pollock's brushwork is typical of abstract expressionist gestural painting, in which visible brushstrokes are seen as physical traces of the creative act. Moving over to the de Kooning painting Saturday Night. De Kooning was born in Rotterdam, and he became one of the most prominent representatives of post-war American abstract expressionism. Saturday Night is characterized by a complex configuration of form and color, with layers of expressive brushwork oriented in multiple directions. Taking the title into account, the horizontal registers of the painting might allude to a gridded cityscape. You know, are we looking at, you know, from above at some kind of grid work here? But also, this work references the female figure, which de Kooning was very well known for painting, with the fleshy tones and these sort of rounded bodily shapes that we can see here and there in the painting. De Kooning's way of making this artwork also puts into question this idea of the completely mental and unplanned action painting, right? We see that he scratched some things away. He added more later. So this isn't just an artwork made in one fell swoop. This is an artwork that was made across a period of time. He would come back to it and come back to it. And so this, really questions this internal artistic reflection, the idea that abstract expressionism is simply this encounter with the canvas, and what you get in that moment is what you get. Both of these artworks actually contest that, because the depiction of the figure and then the removal and repainting of the de Kooning show that these artists had to come back to these works. In the wake of abstract expressionism, artists had to figure out what to do. And minimalism is really a reaction to the overblown focus on the psyche of the artist as the genius and this one encounter with a canvas that creates art. Minimalism really was not based on an artist's subjective powers of expression. It was more based on an aesthetic of reduction, using industrial materials and manufacturing techniques that through sort of employing a systematic process, challenging traditional notions of craftsmanship and the idea that a work of art must be one of a kind. Minimalists took a cue from Duchamp. Many of you might know Marcel Duchamp, who made the ready-made, where he would just went and bought a urinal, turned it upside down, called it an artwork. It's an artwork, right? Way back in 1914. So minimalists are finding found objects, putting them together, and creating artworks that perhaps are not necessarily so handmade. So Barbara Hepworth follows a little bit of that strategy here, although she did carve this piece of mahogany. And Hepworth was a peer of Henry Moore's, and many of her works have, they have dueling forms across the years. But this tall and simple and erect figure is unusual for Hepworth. And I think it reflects this minimalist change that she was going through in a sort of gradual simplification of her work. Plus, I wanted to select Hepworth in order to move us from the heavily weighted male-centric focus on to the women who are now in sort of second wave feminism coming to the fore in art in this time in the 70s. So another thing that's happening in this era is the idea of expressive bodies. By the 1970s, many artists had shifted away from making static objects and begun to focus on performance-based projects and body-oriented actions. Video technology provided a groundbreaking new tool. While some artists were drawn to video's formal and technical properties, others were among the generation of feminist artists who recognized the medium's radical potential to interrogate underlying structures of social control and oppression. Artists such as Carolee Schneemann and Hannah Wilke. Here we see Hannah Wilke, a still from her video Gestures from 1974. They focused their cameras on their own bodies to question social norms and conventions of representation while exploring the boundaries of subjectivity. So who am I as a woman? What does it mean to depict a woman? What does it mean to depict a nude woman? What does it mean to depict an ugly woman? She went through a number of physical actions on her face where she kneaded and pulled her skin as if it were sculptural material, but also to take on a loaded significance by grimacing and sticking out her tongue. Questioning what is it that a woman should do, what's acceptable. Let's question what's acceptable. And I would just remind everybody that until January 16, the Pulitzer Arts Foundation is having a wonderful retrospective of Hannah Wilke's work. And it's really beautifully displayed. So I would encourage everybody to go to the Pulitzer and see a little Hannah Wilke. Okay, our ninth art historical moment is identity-based subject matter. Now, there had been African, Black, and African-American artists for a long time before Romar Bearden came around, but I'm using Romar Bearden's collage here as an example of an artist that wanted to include his own identity as part of the subject matter, marrying references to art history with his own experience as a Black man in the United States. So here we see that Romar Bearden, an African-American artist in the United States, uses collage. Where did we see collage the first time? Back in the Cubists, right? So we know where this comes from. That actual process is a modernist strategy. And he's registering and deconstructing issues of race and identity in 1960s America. Romar Bearden wrote and revealed an understanding of Black subjectivity and identity as something that itself has been collaged by modern history. He feels like he must cut and paste different experiences together. He said, quote, "It's not my aim to paint about the Negro in America, in terms of propaganda. My intention, however, is to reveal through pictorial complexities the richness of the life I know. So Black Venus encapsulates the artist's dual efforts to acknowledge the significance of the art historical canon while revising its forms to assert new representations of African American identity. We can see here the work of Matisse. There's a moving, dancing odalisque over here, and this is a Matisse work that he's certainly referencing. Another reference is Manet's Olympia, a hallmark in the history of art. We have a nude prostitute who is being brought a bouquet from the next gentleman who would like to come in by her African, worker lady in her house, and always this black cat who is, ready to pounce is often mentioned as her true feelings about the men who are coming to see her. We also see references to Picasso's use of African masks in the mask here on the guitar player in the corner. So this stretched out Black Venus is another version of, of this Manet. However, but it's using Romar Bearden's own experience and own expression and taking on art history, incorporating his own identity and experiences as a Black man into an artwork using art historical references. And as an art historian, there's almost nothing more satisfying than an artwork where you can start to pick out these wonderful references from the timeline of art history. And it really enriches an artwork, in my opinion. And so the final, the 10th moment in art history is now. This is a contemporary artwork. And it's an artwork that is really an environmental work. This is a site-specific work installed on the ceiling of the lobby in the Kemper. So if you come visit, you can look up and see this artwork called Cosmic Filaments. It's comprised of 3 iridescent objects, well, 3 groups, I guess, groups that hang from the ceiling, a polyhedron-shaped module out of which grow larger clusters of 3 and 5 modules that together span the distance of the museum's lobby. They're suspended in a network of ropes that replicate the tensile strength, flexibility, and absorbing visual intricacies of a spider web. And they are really beautifully organized, geometrically organized. The 3 geometric modules simultaneously evoke interstellar configurations, microscopic cellular systems, and biospheres in which humans could eventually exist. This work is directly related to Tomas Saraceno's project called Airport City, Cloud City. That work is a visionary proposal for a city in the sky, consisting of a series of bubble-like cells fueled by solar energy that migrate and recombine as freely as clouds themselves. So Cosmic Filaments, this artwork, suggests a utopian vision of life in the air, while also acting out a material and spatial investigations of issues of sustainability, mobility, cohabitation, and environmental collectivity in the present. Plus, it's very beautiful. The surfaces reflect a number of colors that are almost childlike and prismatic and soap bubbly and really attractive. So Saraceno is presenting us with some utopian vision of a way to live in the future, mostly to bring us into a realization of the way we are living now. The last thing that I'd like to leave you with before we go to question and answer is an invitation to come see an exhibition that's on right now at the Kemper. It's open until January 23rd, and it's called the Outwin American Portraiture Today. Virginia Outwin Bucheever is the founder of the triennial competition for portraiture. Okay, and this is run through the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. So every 3 years, they collect all the entrants to be included in the show, and they select a number of artists, and there are top prizes. The last time around, the top prize went to an artist named Amy Sherrill, who was then invited to paint Michelle Obama's portrait. And here's an image from the galleries, and the portraits are really moving, and it's interesting to see who gets a portrait, which subject matters get a portrait. Very contemporary humans who are given this platform to have a portrait today. It's a very moving show. And there will be a Zoom tour on January 23 at 2 p.m. And you can register for that on the Kemper website. And I invite you to join that. It's led by my colleague, Jay Buchanan, an excellent art historian. So I invite you to that, and I thank you for your unending attention and patience, and I welcome any questions you may have.
You want to go ahead and stop this share, then we can see everyone and
Excellent.
thank you. Thank you. So does anyone have any questions? We can take a chat, a question, or raise your hand or computer hand. Such beautiful information and all the paintings and everything that were shared. Phil Miller, do you have a need to unmute yourself?
Great, thanks. Thank you so much for this presentation. Really interesting the way one period influences another, and then the later periods reference the earlier ones. Particularly in those last few periods you talked about, where you, as women's eyes and hands begin to merge more on the art scene. You talk about this idea of the female gaze and what are the different things that it means when artists and people who write about art talk about the female gaze and how it sort of has evolved in recent years. Thanks.
Sure. That's a great question. Thank you, Phil. The female gaze is an understanding of actually not how women look, but how women are looked at. Okay, so there is a movement in film theory, really, that explores how women are projected on film, how they are depicted, what types of roles, etc., because they are enjoyable to the male gaze. Okay, so the theorists who looked at Hitchcock movies and the way that the women are presented in 1950s era, glam to the nines, always in a skirt, impossible to move around, right, etc., and very appealing looking for the male gaze, that women were presented for the delectation of patriarchal society. And so it's interesting, there are women who have turned that into art opportunities where they sort of mock this idea that I'm trying to think of the artist's name. She's having a show right now in the Art Institute of Chicago, Barbara Kruger. And she depicts this woman's face and with the words underneath that say, your eyes are hitting the side of my face and bouncing off, something to that effect. So so the female gaze is really, it's really much more centered on how men look at women, and this notion of the roles we play, the gendered roles that that males and females play in our culture, and the construct of femininity, depending on the decade, the norms of the culture. Great question.
We have some more questions. There was so much beautiful information. It's hard to pick out a question. Yes, Phil, do you have another question?
Yeah, I have a few, but I don't want to take everybody else's time. Just want to thank you for that explanation. And I guess my follow up to that is I guess like what you showed us from Hannah Wilke. Is that what she's trying to do in terms of this thinking about the female gaze? That's my first question. Second question is, if you could just talk a little bit about your research and what you're doing your research on, and then does it fit into some of the things you talked about today, or maybe something completely different? Thanks.
Okay, great. So first, Hannah Wilke, yes, that is what she's doing in many ways. These feminist art historians were identifying and kind of making the male gaze a bit of their subject matter. Now, there is an interesting intrigue that both Hannah Wilke and Carolee Schneemann, who I did not show you an image of, but is a well-known feminist artist from this era, both happen to be conventionally attractive women. So it was very convenient that that was the case, that they were what you would have expected to see on film, and then for them to be making themselves unappealing or kind of moving their face around was a way that they could use their sort of conventional beauty to question, hey, why is this conventional beauty so beautiful? What about all these other parts of me? What about my mind? What about my ability to kind of gross you out sometimes? Carolee Schneemann made a film called Meet Joy. And it's pretty unforgettable if you see it. It is, 20 bathing suit clad men and women dancing around with dead chickens. It's very strange. So it's a little bit of a gross out effect going on. I think these women in the 70s had to make a very strong, I'm not just to be looked at statement. And part of the way of doing that was to make themselves unappealing to look at. And so I think that strategy really worked. And it's pretty complicated, because even me, I look at Hannah Wilke and she's this lovely woman, very attractive, what you expect to see in film and everything. And then she makes bubble gum, body part. You'll see. If you go to the Pulitzer, gotta go check out her work. And then briefly about my work, I have written a dissertation about modernist public sculpture. And I was talking to Judith and Stephen before. It's really that Picasso-esque era between the 1960s and 1980s. Picasso was much earlier than that, but public art for him came late. And there was a boom in abstract public sculpture that went along with the boom in the cachet of that category of art, married with modernist architecture that no longer had any embellishment on the building. Now they had to put an artwork in front on the plaza. So there's a lot of things that came together to make abstract public art the object you wanted to have with your new building. But the question is, how well does that work today? The paradigm of public art is kind of shifted. It's now ephemeral. It's now like the Bean in Chicago. Many of you have been there probably to see it, where you see yourself. It's really about you. It's a wonderful pilgrimage to see an artwork, but what do you get to see? Yourself. You get to see the city. You get to see other things. So it's the artwork itself is actually about the viewer, which is not the case with the Picasso or other more traditional, static, abstract sculptures. So I'm interested in maybe if there's a way, as Judith mentioned, to reawaken these works, revive them, get them some, sort of help them work for people today. And so that's what my work is about. And hopefully I will find a very underpaid job somewhere to continue doing it.
Thank you for your wonderful presentation. And, as we spoke, it helps to bring the things that are there already alive and reintroduce us to the wonderful works of art that are available for us to see and to experience. And I wonder if there's any other questions today. I think that we have a lot to process for today.
One point, Carol wants to know about the various art museums in St. Louis. I would just quickly say, of course, St. Louis Art Museum, the Kemper on our campus at WashU, which is open to the public, the Pulitzer Arts Foundation. Right next to that is the Contemporary Art Museum. Okay, so I would certainly go to that. Those are great, like one day at a time. Once a month on Fridays, first Fridays, they open late. So it's a lovely evening out if you want to go to the two museums. And then City Garden, as a public artist, you got to go down to City Garden. And then finally, Laumeier Sculpture Park. Okay, that's it.
Laumeier is one of my favorites. It's close to my home, so.
I'll be a fellow there in the spring doing a fellowship. So come see me there.
Okay, that sounds wonderful. I don't think we have any more. Stephen, do you have anything that you wanted to add today? No, you're on mute. Stephen? Okay.
On behalf of everybody, I want to say thank you for this thoughtful and really substantive presentation. And obviously, we all wish you the very best as you move forward now that you've completed your dissertation, and wish you only good things in the field of art. I'm sure you'll be teaching lots of people, and I'm sorry that I won't be able to join more of your classes. So thank you again.
Thank you, Tola. Wonderful presentation. And we hope to see you again. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here today, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Thanks
Bye-bye.
for coming.